Hi, welcome back. Now that we've talked about keeping a data catalog and getting into the data frame of mind, let's take a step back and talk about what we mean when we use the term data. This is something that comes up quite a lot when I'm working with journalists. What you mean by data and what kind of data you get your hands on has a lot of influence over the kind of stories you can tell with data. There's 4 basic uses for what we often call data. Number 1, you can report on other people's research. Number 2, you can summarize the data that other people have analyzed. Number 3 is you can do a journalistic style meta-analysis, which is different than an academic style meta-analysis. And number 4, you can conduct research and analysis of your own using raw data and tell a story based on that. All of these activities use data, but what exactly do we mean by data? For the purposes of this course, we're primarily talking about quantitative data, numeric data, or counts of categorical data. Softer data, qualitative data, ethnographic data, images, stories, and more are also very valuable sources of data. But for the purposes of this course, we're talking about quantitative data, mostly numbers. There are 2 types of quantitative data, microdata and aggregate data. It's really important as a journalist telling stories to understand which one you're working with. They're not the same. They are not apples and apples at all. In addition to microdata and aggregate data, there are the results of data analysis. These are usually called statistics or summaries of data. So we have 3 different things: microdata, aggregate data, and statistics, or the results of data analysis. Let's take an example for our story on migration. This is a topic of large international interest, and there's been lots of work done on these stories in the data journalism field. If you're looking for some microdata, which is raw, unprocessed, line-by-line data where each line represents a person, you can find microdata on sites like the OECD Migration Database, the United Nations Refugee and Immigration Database, and the database on immigrants in OECD and non-OECD countries. Also, even the Program for International Student Assessment. This is raw data that you can use to conduct your own analysis, to look at how variables interact in the specific way that you want to for your story. Secondly, aggregate data. There's lots and lots of aggregate data available on the topic of migration that you can use to help build a story. The most common places to find aggregate data are on websites of organizations that work in the sector. For example, the World Bank Migration and Remittance Factbook contains lots of aggregate data. So they've taken their raw data and they've aggregated or rolled it up into groups. So instead of data about individual people, this aggregate data is looking at data on individual countries. So we're looking at summaries of people. Another place that does this is the OECD or the United Nations. There's lots of places to find tables, which are summaries of microdata. Then we get to the third category, the results of data analysis. These are usually the easiest to find and often the easiest to report on, but they have some weaknesses that make them sometimes less preferable than microdata or aggregate data. For example, the Migration Policy Institute has a great series of reports on trends in migration, the push factors towards migration, the pull factors towards migration, and predictions about future trends in migration. These go way beyond either microdata or aggregate data. These are actual statistical analyses done by professionals that create statistics or the results of data analysis. One of the reasons that you need to understand what type of data you're working with is because this lets you know how many levels of other people's assumptions have been incorporated into the data. If you're working with raw data, you can conduct the analysis in exactly the way you want, using only the variables that answer your question most accurately and test the perspective and worldview that you're trying to expose or explore in your story. However, if you're reporting on other people's research or statistics, the results of data analysis, you're reporting on the worldview and the perspectives that this person has already taken. So this person has taken the raw data, applied their worldview to it through data analysis, and given you their results. This is not necessarily bad. You just need to know when you're doing it.